The overhead lights in sub-level 3 of the Hargrove Tower parking garage flickered twice before settling into their usual grey-white hum. It was 1147 on a Tuesday night, and Elena Marsh was the last person still working in the building, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the black SUV that had been sitting with its engine off near the stairwell for the past 40 minutes. Elena noticed it the way she noticed everything quietly, without reacting, filing it somewhere useful in the back of her mind. She adjusted the strap of her laptop bag, clicked her car key, and listened for the beep of her silver Honda 2 rows over. She had her keys between her fingers, not the self-defense grip she'd seen online. Just the practical grip of a woman who'd been walking to her car alone at night for 15 years and had learned which things actually mattered. The SUV door opened before she reached her car. 3 men stepped out. Then a 4th. Dominic Varro was the kind of man who didn't need to announce himself. He was tall in the way that felt architectural, everything about him built for presence. He wore a cream-colored suit jacket over a black shirt. No tie, and his dark hair was swept back like he'd just come from somewhere that served very expensive whiskey. He had tattoos on his left hand that crept up past his wrist and disappeared under his sleeve. He was objectively beautiful in the way that certain predators were beautiful, striking right up until the moment they moved. He moved now. Elena didn't run. She had known, somewhere beneath the ordinary surface of the past 3 years, that this moment was coming. She had prepared for it the way you prepare for a hurricane you can see forming on the horizon, not with panic, but with logistics. He stopped in front of her. His men formed a loose perimeter, not touching her, just present. A reminder of arithmetic. Ms. Marsh. His voice was low and unhurried. He looked her over the navy cardigan, the red pencil skirt, the laptop bag with the fraying strap she kept meaning to replace. She watched his eyes doing what most people's eyes did, cataloging her, placing her in a category, deciding what she was worth. You've been a very hard woman to get alone. I work late, she said. It's not a secret. No. He tilted his head slightly. But some of your other activities have been... He reached out then, not slowly, not dramatically, just with the casual certainty of a man who had never been stopped, and put his hand against her jaw, not squeezing, just resting there. A demonstration. Elena looked at him. She did not look at his hand. I want to know, he said. Where you put it? Put what? His grip tightened slightly. Behind him. One of his men shifted his weight. The fluorescent light buzzed. Don't, he said quietly. We've been watching your work for 6 weeks. We know you found the secondary ledger. We know you copied the routing numbers. And we know that 3 days ago, something moved. His thumb pressed slightly against her cheekbone. So I'll ask again. Where did you put it? Elena Marsh had been the bookkeeper for Varro Holdings LLC for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She had taken the job because it paid $22 an hour more than her previous position at a shipping logistics firm, because the office was 8 minutes from her apartment, and because she was, at her core, a person who could not look at a set of crooked numbers without needing to understand why they were crooked. That last part had been her undoing, or so she'd thought for a while. Now she wasn't so sure. Mr. Varro, she said. I need you to think very carefully about the next 30 seconds. He almost smiled. Almost. Is that right? You have your hand on my face in a parking garage with working security cameras. She let that sit for exactly 1 beat. I know you own the building. I know you probably own the security footage, but I filed a report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network 14 months ago. And I've been in contact with a federal agent named Carla Donovan at the Chicago field office every 3 weeks since then. She has a standing instruction. If I miss a check-in, she opens a package. The almost smile disappeared. The package, Elena continued, contains copies of everything I found in the secondary ledger. The routing numbers, the offshore accounts, the shell company filings going back to 2019, the vendor invoices that don't match any real vendors, and a complete breakdown of how approximately $4.2 million in cash was laundered through Varro Holdings' subsidiary in Naperville. She paused. I also included the photographs of the men who came to my apartment in March. You remember March? March had been when someone had broken into her apartment while she was at her sister's birthday dinner and gone through her filing cabinet without moving anything. A professional job. Except they'd missed the fact that Elena had a small camera in the smoke detector above her desk that she'd installed herself the previous November. Having noticed for the first time that one of the routing numbers in the quarterly report didn't correspond to any financial institution she could locate, she had not told anyone about the camera. She had simply noted who came, what they looked for, and adjusted her plans accordingly. Dominic Varro's hand dropped from her face. He stared at her, and Elena watched something move through his expression that she found genuinely interesting, not quite fear, not quite respect, but something that sat uncomfortably between them. Recalculation. You've been planning this, he said. I've been documenting this. She corrected. There's a difference. Planning implies I wanted something to happen. I just wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, it would cost you everything. The money, he said, the $4 million, is no longer where you think it is. She said, it's also not where I put it originally. I moved it 2 days ago. Not to steal it, I want to be clear about that. Because I suspect that distinction matters to you. I moved it because I needed you to come talk to me. He blinked. For the first time since he'd stepped out of the SUV, Dominic Varro looked like a man who was not entirely certain what was happening. You wanted me to come. I wanted a conversation. Elena said, I've been trying to have it for a year. You don't take meetings with bookkeepers. She shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Now you are. There was a long silence in sub-level 3 of the Hargrove Tower parking garage. One of his men looked at another. The fluorescent light kept buzzing. Talk, Dominic said finally. Elena Marsh had grown up in Rockford, Illinois. The middle child of a postal worker and a woman who cleaned offices for a medical complex on the north side of town. She was the kind of kid who did her siblings' taxes at 19 and organized her mother's filing system for free because she couldn't stand watching her mother stress about losing receipts. She had a gift for numbers, the way some people had a gift for music, not just understanding them, but hearing the logic underneath them. The way a wrong note sounds wrong before you can name why. She'd gotten a scholarship to the University of Illinois at Champaign, studied accounting, graduated with honors, and spent the next decade working her way up through a series of legitimate firms before landing at Varro Holdings through a recruiter who had described it as a private investment firm with diverse assets and excellent compensation. She had known within 3 months that the compensation was excellent because the firm was not entirely legitimate. She had known within 6 that the discrepancies she was finding were not accidents. She had spent the following 2+ years deciding what to do about it. The thing people didn't understand about Elena Marsh, the thing Dominic Varro had clearly not understood. Looking at her in the elevator of his building every morning with the same polite invisibility he extended to the maintenance staff was that being quiet and being passive were not the same thing. She had a sister with 2 kids who depended on her. She had a mother whose knees were getting worse and who was going to need surgery in the next few years that her insurance wouldn't fully cover. She had a small apartment she was 3 years from owning and a retirement account she'd been building since she was 24. She was not going to blow up her life for a man who'd never learned her last name, but she was also not going to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. So she'd done what she always did. She'd made a plan. A careful one. A patient one. The kind that required her to keep showing up. Keep doing her job perfectly. Keep being invisible, while simultaneously building something underneath the surface that would hold, even if she wasn't there to hold it. The federal contact had been the hardest part. Agent Carla Donovan had been skeptical at first. Another anonymous tip about organized crime money laundering. From someone unwilling to identify themselves. It had taken Elena 4 months of carefully curated documentation before Donovan had agreed to meet her in person at a coffee shop in Evanston. After that meeting, Donovan's skepticism had transformed into something that looked a great deal like barely contained excitement. "You understand what you're sitting on," Donovan had said, holding the folder Elena had handed her. "I understand what I documented." Elena had replied, "I'll leave the rest to you. We'll need you to keep working there." "I know." Elena had said, "I'm fine with that." She had been fine with that for over a year. Through 2 additional federal meetings. Through the break-in in March. Through a period in the late fall when one of Varro's mid-level men had started paying unusual attention to her during office hours in a way that felt specifically like surveillance. She had continued doing her job. She had continued being invisible. She had continued building the file, and 2 nights ago, when she detected the movement on the secondary account that told her someone inside Varro's organization had figured out what she was doing. She had made 3 phone calls, sent 2 encrypted messages, and moved the money. "Here's what I want," Elena said to Dominic Varro in the parking garage. He was leaning against the hood of the SUV now. Arms crossed. His men had drifted back slightly, recalibrating to a situation that was not the one they'd been briefed on. Elena had moved to stand near the front of her car, bag on her shoulder, keys in hand. Not performing casualness. Actually calm. "My mother needs knee surgery," she said. "The out-of-pocket after insurance is approximately $46,000. I want that covered. Anonymously. Through a legitimate medical payment mechanism, I'll provide the details. I want a written severance agreement for my departure from Varro Holdings that lists the reason as mutual consent and includes a non-disparagement clause that runs both ways. I want 18 months of health insurance continuation, and I want the name of whoever in your organization has been passing my personnel file to external parties, because I'm fairly certain that person is not acting on your orders and is working an angle that will eventually cause you more problems than I am." Dominic stared at her. "That's it," he said. "That's it. You're not asking for money. The surgery payment is for my mother." Elena said, "That's not for me. I have my salary, my savings, and my retirement account. I don't need your money." "Mr. Varro, I need you to understand that I'm not your enemy unless you make me one." There was another long silence. "The $4 million, he said again. He couldn't seem to let it go. She understood that $4 million was not an abstraction to a man like him. It was a number with weight, with history, with the names of people attached to it. "I didn't take it," she said. "I moved it to a holding account that I control but have not touched. If we reach an agreement tonight, I will return it to whatever account you direct me to within 48 hours. If we don't reach an agreement tonight, it will go to the Federal Bureau of Investigation along with everything else in the package. and we'll all spend the next several years in rooms with lawyers. And if I just take the information from you," Dominic said. His voice had gone very quiet. "The account information, by other means." Elena looked at him steadily. "You could try," she said. "But I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as a practical statement. Not a threat. There are 4 other people who have partial keys to the account. None of them know they have them. None of them know each other. None of them have any relationship to this situation. If something happens to me, those keys activate automatically, and the money routes to an account that Agent Donovan has been monitoring for 2 weeks." She paused. "I've been very careful. Mr. Varro. It's what I do." Dominic Varro looked at Elena Marsh for a long moment. She watched him look at her, really look at her. Maybe for the first time in 3 years. She did not look away. "Who are you?" he said, quietly. And it wasn't quite a question. "I'm your bookkeeper," she said. "Or I was. I'd like to be done now, if that works for you." They didn't reach an agreement that night. That wasn't realistic. And Elena hadn't expected it. What they reached was a ceasefire, an acknowledgement, on Dominic's part, that the situation was not what he'd thought it was, and a commitment, on Elena's part, to a follow-up meeting in 48 hours with legal representation on both sides. She drove home with her hands steady on the wheel, and her heart beating at approximately twice its resting rate, which she thought was reasonable under the circumstances. She called her sister from the car. "Hey," her sister Pauline said. Groggy, it was past midnight. "What's up?" "Nothing," Elena said. "Just wanted to hear your voice. Go back to sleep." "You okay?" "Yeah," Elena said. "I think I'm okay." She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she was fairly sure it was going to be. The following 48 hours were the longest of Elena's life. She slept in 4-hour increments, ate things she couldn't taste, checked her encrypted messages with a frequency that she recognized as irrational, and did anyway. She met with a lawyer named Priya Chandrasekaran, who had been recommended by Agent Donovan and who sat across from Elena in a glass-walled conference room and read through Elena's documentation with the careful, accelerating attention of someone realizing they were holding something important. "This is comprehensive," Priya said, turning a page. "Thank you." "Are you afraid?" Elena thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "But I've been afraid for 2 years. I've gotten used to operating while afraid. I think that's different from being paralyzed by it." Priya looked at her over the top of the folder. "I need you to know that what you're describing, going back in for the meeting, negotiating directly is not something I would typically recommend." "I know," Elena said. "I'm not going in because I think it's safe. I'm going in because the alternative is going to federal trial, which is going to take 3 years and destroy everyone involved, including several people who don't deserve it." She thought of the office manager, Linda, who brought in homemade muffins every Friday and had no idea what the company she worked for was doing with its revenue. She thought of the IT guy, Marcus, who played tabletop RPGs on weekends and had once helped Elena set up her new monitor without being asked. "I've worked there for 3 years. I know who's complicit and who's incidental. I'd like to give the people in the second category a chance to just walk away." Priya studied her. "You're an unusual client." "I'm an accountant," Elena said. "We tend to think in terms of what's most efficient." The second meeting happened in a conference room at a neutral law firm in the West Loop on a Thursday afternoon. Elena sat on one side of the table with Priya. Dominic Varro sat on the other side with two lawyers, whose suits probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, and a man she didn't recognize who turned out to be a forensic accountant hired to verify her claims about the money. The forensic accountant spent 20 minutes reviewing what Elena provided. Then he set his pen down and said something quietly to one of the lawyers. The lawyer's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. Dominic watched Elena across the table. She watched him back. They negotiated for 4 hours. At the end of those 4 hours, Elena had her mother's surgical bills covered through a medical trust administered by Priya's firm, her severance and insurance agreement, a legal name for the internal operative who had been selling her personnel file to a competing crime family operating out of Milwaukee, information that visibly interested Dominic in the way that information about enemies interested dangerous men, and a structured cooperation arrangement between Dominic's attorneys and the federal government that would take another 6 months to fully formalize, but that Agent Donovan, reached by phone during a brief recess, had described as more than we expected. Elena transferred the $4.2 million at 4:15 on a Thursday afternoon from a coffee shop 2 blocks from the law firm. Using her laptop and a secured connection, she watched the confirmation screen for a moment. Then she closed the laptop. Outside, it had started to drizzle. The city moved around her the way it always did, indifferent. Enormous. Going about its business. She sat in the coffee shop for a while with a cup of tea she didn't really taste and thought about the past 3 years. All the mornings she'd taken the elevator up to the 14th floor of Hargrove Tower. All the lunch breaks she'd spent in her car reviewing files she wasn't supposed to have copied. All the evenings she'd spent in her apartment, cross-referencing routing numbers, while her sister called to ask if she was okay. She thought about her mother's knees. She thought about the look on Dominic Varro's face in the parking garage. When he'd asked, "Who are you?" like the question had surprised him by existing, she thought about the answer she'd given him, which was the true one: "I'm your bookkeeper," because that was all she'd ever been. A bookkeeper who was very good at her job. A bookkeeper who noticed things. A woman who had been invisible to everyone in that building for 3 years, and who had used that invisibility the way you use any resource you've been given, carefully, intentionally, to build something that would last. Elena Marsh resigned from Varro Holdings the following Monday. She submitted a standard 2 weeks' notice letter, cleaned out her desk, returned her keycard, and accepted a handshake from the office manager, Linda, who said she would be missed and meant it. She took 3 weeks off. She visited her mother in Rockford, sat on the back porch, and watched her mom walk from the kitchen to the yard and back without wincing. The surgery already scheduled for 6 weeks out. She took her niece and nephew to the aquarium in Chicago. She slept for 8 hours a night. In her 4th week, she started getting calls. The first was from a risk management firm in Streeterville that had heard through the specific grapevine that exists in financial and legal circles that she was available. The second was from a private equity firm in River North. The third was from a compliance consultancy that specialized in financial investigations and whose founding partner told her, with startling directness, that they'd been looking for someone with her particular skill set for about 2 years. Elena took her time returning the calls. She made a spreadsheet. Because she was who she was. She listed the firms, their reputations, their rates, their case types. She read everything publicly available about each of them. She asked Priya for background on 2 of them that she couldn't verify to her satisfaction independently. In the end, she accepted the offer from the compliance consultancy at a rate that was $31,000 more per year than she'd been making at Varro Holdings. with a caseload that would require her to do exactly what she'd done for the past 3 years, look at numbers that didn't add up and figure out why. It felt, she thought, like the most natural thing in the world. The legal proceedings related to Varro Holdings took the better part of the following year to work through. Elena cooperated fully with the federal investigation in the manner outlined by her agreement. She gave 3 depositions, reviewed approximately 800 pages of financial records with investigators, and was never once required to appear in open court, a provision that had been, from her perspective, non-negotiable. Dominic Varro entered a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors in the spring. Elena heard about it from Priya in a brief text message finalized today. You should know. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji and went back to the tax irregularity case she was reviewing for her new firm's client in Cincinnati. She thought about him sometimes, in the way you think about a chapter of your life that required you to be a different version of yourself than you'd expected. She didn't think about him with anger, particularly. She thought about him with the specific, mild interest she felt about most things that had tried to reduce her and failed. She had never, not once, been afraid of Dominic Varro in the way he'd intended her to be afraid of him. She had been afraid of what he could do that was different and appropriate, and had informed every practical decision she'd made, but afraid of him, of his hand on her jaw, of his expectation that she would flinch. No, she had looked at him in that parking garage and seen a man who had built his entire sense of power on the assumption that people like her didn't think strategically, didn't plan, didn't count. People like her counted everything. 14 months after the night in the parking garage, Elena's mother came through knee surgery with a recovery that her surgeon described as excellent for her age and fitness level. She was up and walking without significant pain within 8 weeks, which she reported to Elena over the phone with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had been told for 2 years that she needed to slow down and had declined to accept this as her destiny. I walked to the mailbox today, her mother said, and back. That's good. Mom. It didn't hurt. I know. That's the point. There was a brief silence on the line, and then her mother said, in a different tone, you did that, didn't you? The trust thing that Priya's firm set up. Elena had prepared for this conversation. Mom, don't tell me it was an insurance thing. I've worked around insurance paperwork my whole life, and that is not how insurance paperwork works. Elena was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I did that. Another silence. How her mother said, I was very good at my job. Elena said carefully, and I made sure that what I was good at mattered to the right people. Her mother was quiet for a long time. Elena listened to the sound of the backyard through the phone, the neighbor's dog, a car somewhere on the street. The particular ambient quality of a Tuesday afternoon in Rockford. I always knew you were going to do something, her mother said finally. I just didn't know what. Neither did I, Elena said honestly. For a while. But you figured it out. Yes. Good, her mother said. And then, with a directness that Elena had always understood she had inherited, don't tell your sister. She'll tell everyone. Elena laughed, actually laughed. The kind that surprised you by arriving. Yeah, she said. Okay. She sat with her phone in her hand after they hung up and looked out the window of her apartment at the city doing its ordinary Thursday afternoon things below. Traffic. People. The pale November sky over the lake. She thought, I am 37 years old and I have a retirement account and a mother who can walk without pain and a job that makes sense of the thing I'm best at. She thought I have been underestimated by people with a great deal more power than me. And it has never once been their advantage. She opened her laptop. She had a set of numbers to look at a shipping company in Indianapolis, whose quarterly filings had a particular texture she'd learned to recognize. A small discrepancy. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Elena Marsh paid attention. She put her tea down, cracked her knuckles gently, and got to work.